So, the Budapest summit is off, and Donald Trump has imposed sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, and the EU has approved its 19th package of Russia sanctions. What are the Russian papers saying about all of this? RBK, for the first time in Donald Trump's second presidency, the US has imposed sanctions on Russia. The blacklisted corporations account for 50% of Russian oil production. These sanctions may have an effect on exports, the state budget, the value of the ruble. An economist tells the paper that Russian oil companies have pretty much adapted to sanctions and have found different ways of getting round restrictions. However, if India cuts the amount of Russian oil it buys, other markets will need to be found. And there's no guarantee that China would agree to buy up all the lost volume. Overall, sanctions will negatively affect the Russian oil industry, experts concede. Kommersant, 3/4 of Russia's oil exports are now under sanctions. The head of the Russian International Affairs Council believes that US measures against Lukoil and Rosneft are important as a political signal. After Trump moved into the White House, Washington held off from imposing new sanctions, even though allies, the EU and the UK, went ahead. The return to sanctions is a negative indicator. It may show that prospects for the resolution of the Ukraine issue have been set back. Officially, the US is presenting the new sanctions as a means for a ceasefire, but Russia doesn't take decisions under pressure. This useful chart shows Donald Trump quotes on Russia and Ukraine over the last month. In red, statements critical of Moscow, apparently putting pressure on Russia. In green, quite the opposite, less pressure on the Kremlin. Which brings us on to Komsomolskaya Pravda and a famous Russian expression. If someone is said to have 7 Fridays in a week, it means they are inconsistent, unreliable. The headline here, 7 Trumps in a week. The paper writes, he's so contradictory. Donald imposed sanctions, but said he wasn't sure how effective they'd be. A political scientist is quoted as saying that President Trump is capable of back-peddling any time. He's that kind of person. Izvestia notes that in his comments to Russian journalists, President Putin avoided sharp words about the decisions of his American counterpart, with whom he met quite recently in Alaska, although naturally the steps taken by the US damage Russia-US relations. Several of the papers headline President Putin's warning that Moscow's response to missile strikes deep into Russia would be very serious, if not overwhelming. Moskovsky Komsomolets quotes the former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, as saying that President Trump's decisions are an act of war against Russia. But that is not the official position of the Kremlin. We can tell that from the toned-down reaction of Vladimir Putin, and perhaps from this in the Russian government paper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. The fact that the Budapest summit was postponed does not fundamentally change anything. Contacts between Russia and the US on the search for an acceptable outcome continue.